Shalom, all praises to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushua, Ba'ashem Harakakadash, double honors to the apostles and elders, great most on the rule well, and Shalom to all the brothers doing the work, considering truth, pushing us word to the four corners. You had these dunces, these class clowns at ISUPK, just completely, with no understanding, no depth whatsoever, saying like the Yoruba tribes, Igbo tribes, basically the Jakes you have on the West Coast aren't these guys aren't Israelites, which if you even scrape two brain cells together, it don't make no sense, because obviously as far as for it's for Jake that you have the bulk of Jake that you have in the US anyway. Where the fuck did these guys come from, man? These guys got nabbed up off the West Coast. That alone is enough to to let you know, like, hold on. So if you got Israelites in America and they were taken off the West Coast, Jake would have been up on the West Coast. And then just like with Egypt, just like with Babylon, Greece, all these times that Jake essentially resided somewhere, there was a residue left. Even when, the 10 tribes went off to the Americas, there was still a residue of them that was still in Israel. So, as far as for you to just say, yeah, they're all Hamites, you got no understanding. So I read this, Jeremiah 17:4, and it says, "And thou even thyself shalt discontinue from thine heritage that I gave thee, and I will cause thee to serve thine enemies in the land which thou knowest not, for you have kindled a fire in mine anger, which shall burn forever." So yeah, Jake's basically got that period of time where they're going to discontinue. And that essentially they had, when they were off on the West Coast, they had a shadow of things, but then a lot of things basically degraded. They didn't have the full understanding. And you had that continue into where they were grabbed up. Esau took them into the US, parts of Arabia, parts of India and whatnot, where they're put in hardcore bondage. But as far as, you basically have that time where Jake is out there not knowing who the hell they are. And that applies for the Jakes in America as well, man. These, a lot of these guys, until High Priest Abba Bivens came on the scene, they didn't know what the hell was going on. By and large, that's really when the spirit started moving to rouse and wake up Jake. And that's when they're able. That's why you have, you still have to this day the whole Pan-African, Egyptologist, the whole, allure of Ham. But then when you're dealing with, the West Coast, these guys, when you're dealing with them, obviously, even me, my brother, were both from, so-called Nigeria, Yoruba. Even, man, yeah, it's like Nas, man. Like, you try and these guys, you get them to try and say, like, Nas is a Hamite. They ain't gonna happen. But, they're being simpletons, man. So Matthew 24:16 says, "Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him." Well, okay. Let me start from 15. It says, "When ye when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in a holy place, whoso readeth let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains." And that's really like the baseline to kind of get any kind of understanding of what the hell was going down. Because you can go into, I was leafing out the books to kind of go through it, and it's simple, because like man used to go into this all the time. You got Babylon to Timbuktu, you got Hebrews of West Africa. You got these different books. We'll go into the tribes on the West Coast and their customs. And then it's just Esau came over there, and it was just like, yo, these guys have to be Hebrews. What's going on here? So So it says in Babylon Timbuktu, it says, in the year 65 BC, the Roman armies under General Pompey captured Jerusalem. In 70 AD, General Vespasian and his son Titus put an end to the Jewish state with great slaughter. During the periods of the military governors of Palestine, many outrages and atrocities were committed against the residue of the people. During the period from Pompey to Julius, it's been estimated that over a million Jews fled into Africa, fleeing from Roman persecution and slavery. The slave markets were full of black Jewish slaves. So yeah, you had that period of time where essentially what Jake was scattered. They were essentially they're obviously in the land, but then when Rome came down with a hammer, then it's like, as Yahushua said, flee ye to mountains. These guys had to depart. They had to scarper. Cause why? They'll otherwise they'll get fucked up, man. They'll getting jacked up. You know, Esau ain't having no mercy. But I listen to this because I read this from Hebrewisms of West Africa. Because kind of, it's kind of plain, man. It cuts to it, and it's just like, this is the thing that Esau obviously knew when he came to the West Coast, when he was dealing with Jake. Same when he went to the Americas. Then it was just like, yo, these are the Hebrews, man. And then, because otherwise it's too plain. So on page 35, it says while then many of Bowditch's observations must be rejected as specious, some of them, at least as I've mentioned here. It's true that they may be that they may be of little value in themselves, but certain facts adduced will tend to strengthen our own general theory that somewhere in the remote past there was an infiltration of the ancient Hebrews in the parent stock from which the present Ashanti were evolved. So yeah, basically going back in the history, you had, Jake, Hebrews go up into these regions in the West Coast. They could say the Ashanti tribe. And that essentially applies on a broader scope to most of the Gold Coast. And they trace, the lineage going back to where the Yoruba tribes are, the Igbos as well. Essentially among, there were, it was Judah, Benjamin, Levi, chiefly that was there. So then they would have dispersed and separated and been out there, man. And then they were keeping the customs, because that's more or less what what makes it plain as day. So I'll just skip down to conclusions. So yeah, this is page 319. It says, we feel safe then in formulating our first conclusion. Somewhere in the dim past, a wave of more probably a series of waves of Hebraic influence swept over Negro Africa, which is why, when they have the maps of that time, they call it Negro land, because the Negro term didn't just apply to every black that was in Africa. It was applied on on certain regions, and that was where the bulk of Jake was within Africa, man. Because as far as you had the Hamites there, you would have you would have had a residue of Hamites among Jake, but by and large the bulk would have just been straight up Jakes. And that's what these guys got grabbed up and taken to the US, man. This is what leaving unmistakable traces among various tribes where they have endured even to the present day. This is demonstrated, as we've seen, by such cultural elements among the Ashanti as the occult, religious dances, use of Amen, vow value, patriarchal system, parallel symbolism of authority installed in chair, endogamy, cross-cousin marriages, familial names, exogamy, simplicity of marriage rite, uncleanness after childbirth, purification ceremonies, menstrual seclusion, ceremonial ablutions, and Ashanti loanwords of apparent Hebrew origin. Then in matters of religion, we have truly remarkable similarity of the Ashanti Yahweh and the Hebrew, obviously Yahweh. First, as regards the etymological derivation of the words themselves, and then in the tribal concept of divine attributes, and the created channels of divine influence, and finally in a divided service accorded, the adoption of fetishism or its equivalent without any apostasy from monotheism, the subtle reference to a redeemer, to Korah, the son of the supreme power. Essentially, another key one is what it says, the survival of what appears to be the breastplate and a miznefet of the Jewish high priest. So, these guys were in and among these tribes, and they saw us like, yo, these men are just moving completely. These guys are just got all kinds of customs. These guys are moving like they're straight Hebrews, man. Which is, and it was, it was to the point it was undeniable. But yeah, it says that the Hebrew cultural elements are not isolated incidences among the Ashanti, but are to be found in less degree broadcast through Negroland, as shown from similar traits in other tribes. Like I said, in Negroland, where the Negroes are, which is where when they scarpered, when they had to flee from Rome, they went up to Africa, went up into Europe, and then where they settled in Africa, then obviously they're gonna have been conducting themselves. So I read this from Babylon to Timbuktu. It says the black Jews had an advantage over the African tribes. They carried their culture, history, laws, and written records with them. This assured them a constant precedent for the development of a higher social organization. Because of the stability of the black Jewish culture, the Jews were not absorbed. Some of the native tribes, the Jews made use of were not absorbed into the autochthonous population. In fact, the Jews absorbed some of the native tribes. The Jews made use of every opportunity. They were an industrious and skillful people. In the Jewish Ghanaian states were found kings, princes, governors, generals, secretaries, treasurers, revenue agents, judges, architects, engineers, doctors, historians, language interpreters, mathematicians, jewelers, sculptors, masons, carpenters, painters of art, goldsmiths, leather workers, potters, armorers, saddlers, blacksmiths, agriculturalists, etc. So the way they conducted themselves was averse to how all the other heathen around them, all the other Hamites were conducting themselves. There was a clear difference between the two, which is, like I said, that's why it's called Negro land, because it's those tribes, those different regions, the Ashanti, the Yoruba, the Igbos, the way they were moving, they were obviously there was a difference, and these guys had a something that bound them together, which is what obviously they were Israelites, they were Hebrew Israelites. That's where they went back to. They just kept it going, but then there was that falling away, where they didn't have the fullness of it. So it says, back in Hebrewism, West Africa, it says that the Hebrew cultural elements are not isolated instances among the Ashanti, but to be found in less degree broadcast through Negroland, is shown through similar traits in other tribes. Thus, for example, in floggings, the traditional number of strokes, 40 less 1, the common practice of new moon festivals, the oath drink akin to the scriptural bitter waters, expectation of a Messiah, Jewish distinction between Diaboli and Daimonia, the duodecimal division of tribes into families, exogamy, bloody sacrifices with a sprinkling of blood upon the altar and doorposts, mourning customs, obsessions, legal defilement, Jewish octave, law on adultery, Sabbath rest, levirate marriages, circumcision, priestly garb, It's funny because circumcision is such like the fact West Coast does it. When I was younger, I thought it was normal, but then like only after I realized it's really only what, the guys you got in the state Israel now, Amalek keeping it up, and then like the West Coast as well. It's not, and then it'll be the so-called Muslim areas as well. But then what? It's outside of that. It's not a thing. It's something that's frowned upon. You know, Esau called it mutilation. So that's really a separation. But then what? It was a symbol of the covenant between Abraham and Yahweh Hashem Yahushai. So this is what priestly garb, etc., while the glass manufactured at Nupe and the carvings on window shutters indicate a Palestinian influence. The terracotta heads found in Yoruba apostolate ultimately mephitic influx of culture. But yeah, as far as, the way these guys were moving, what other explanation could there be? Because it was that cold. But then that's the thing is, now, these things spoken about, hell no. Ain't no one talking about that shit. These are things that have, like, you go back, you can read the books. It's plain as day. And then, if you're going to be in the US, calling yourself a Hebrew, knowing how you got grabbed up to get brought over there, I don't know what that, you basically, you're batshit insane, man. Because of course you're going to have Jake still over there, man. Deuteronomy 28:64, it says, "And the Lord Yahweh shall scatter thee among all people from the one end of the earth even unto the other. And there shalt thou serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone." So plain as day, you're gonna have Jakes scattered all over. That's just that's undeniable. You're gonna have Jake scattered all over. What do you call that? You're gonna have Jake scattered. What's it called? All over the earth, which includes what do you call it, man? The West Coast. So it's undeniable that you're gonna have Jake there. But then obviously the bulk's in America. But then you're also gonna have a bulk over there, because that's where Jake was residing, man. But this, these guys are simple as hell. Says what? Isaiah 11:11. "It shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria, and from Egypt, and from Pathros, and from Cush, and from Elam, and from Shinar, and from Hamath, from the islands of the sea." So of course you're gonna have Jake, still in these places where Israel's resided before. You can straight up just have Jake there. Fucking funny. In the scriptures, plain as day. "And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth." Plain as day. You're going to have Jake scattered to the end. And then what? They're going to be gathered. So of course you're going to have Jake over on the West Coast. Of course you're going to, you're going to have them among Amalek, man. Come on, man. Mark 13:24. "But in those days, after the tribulation, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light. The stars of heaven shall fall, and the powers that are in heaven shall be shaken. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And then shall he send his angels, and shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from the utmost part of the earth to the utmost part of heaven." So the elect's going to be gathered from the four winds, man. From all over. As it's, it's been made plain as day. And you're going to have them over on the West Coast. You still have Jakes over there. You have Jakes that come from these regions waking up. So, what obviously, the spirit's not working with these guys, man. These guys don't know what the hell's going on. If you ain't even able to know, okay, who's Jake, who's an Israelite, then how are you gonna break down what? Even what the mark is, what times when, what's getting ready to happen, man. Simple as hell. But yeah, I'll leave it there. Shalom. Yabashim Shabashim Kakata.